Well, good morning, church. How you doing this morning? It is good to see you. Good to be with you. Jeff walked off stage and told me they are ready. Are you guys ready? They are ready. All right. Hey, it's so good to have the Northview students' presence in the house today. We're so grateful to have you. I got to spend this last week at high school camp, and I think high school camp went about as good as middle school camp went as good as our grade school camp has gone. Guys, camp season has been incredible, and I just got to say thank you to so many of you who helped make that as approachable as it possibly could be for so many families, just to ensure that a whole bunch of kids were able to go. I know we took 110 to high school camp. We took 80-ish to middle school. Grade school is packed. Again, the last one starts this week. Lucy leaves today till Wednesday. Just amazing. It's just been amazing. I'll tell you a little story just to kind of paint a picture of how incredible the week was, the high school week. On the front of the stage at the high school camp, there was this little button, for lack of a better term, that you could hit. If you were making a decision, you were coming forward and you were saying, like, I'm choosing Jesus. Like whether for the first time or I'm rededicating, I'm choosing Jesus, I'm going all in. That was kind of a signal to the crowd that I'm making a decision. Boom, I'm in. And there was this lighthouse, because that was part of the theme, that would light up. And the crowd would just go crazy every time someone would do that. Well, as the camp goes on, typically you're seeing that happen after the sermon, during worship. Someone would hit a light, we'd sing. By the time we got to like the third night and the fourth night, they weren't even waiting for the sermon to be preached that night. It was like God had put it on their heart, and we were doing the warm-up song, Here Comes Somebody, bam, hitting that light, crowds going forward, going crazy. In the middle of the third sermon, just while the guy's talking, two people just walked up, boom, hit the light. Like he said that right line, God said, that's for you, and they just got up and said, I'm in, and then like 7 people get up to go hug the person that just made that decision, and then somebody else hits it. It's just this holy kind of discombobulation that was happening out in the crowd. And, I know that that's a little bit of what's going on right now, because there's a whole bunch of baptisms that are going to happen in just a little bit. In fact, some of you are ready to make that decision, and you're going, will you stop talking so that we can just get to that part? Right? I get that. I'm so excited about what's about to go down. Really excited. There's people standing in the back looking for seats, trying to figure out how to get in. There's still some spots here, so come on in, guys, if you're trying to find a spot. What an exciting day. What an exciting moment that we're celebrating. Again, God's been transforming hearts. Over 30 baptisms between middle school and high school these last 2 weeks either happened or are about to happen in the next couple days. Some of them happened at the beach. Yeah. Some of them happened at the beach. There's a bunch happening today. There's a bunch happening in a few days. So, guys, we prayed about it. This is what we prayed about, and God brought this to reality. And so we're praising Him, thanking Him for what it is. And I'll tell you what we did when we were at all of our camps, because this is just following Jesus 101. We point to grace. And we point to the grace that's offered in Christ. And we call people to receive that gift that God has given you. Not to try to earn anything, not to try to work for anything, but to receive a gift that's been given to them in Christ, that's been given to cover mistakes and rebellion and failure and struggle, bondage, slavery. And say, now that you've been transformed, now that you've been changed by the grace of God, commit to honoring that gift and commit to living in a way that would bring a smile to your Savior because of that good gift that He gave you. That's essentially what it is to follow God, not to fight or to work for victory, but to live from victory and to fight from victory. And what we've been doing for the last several weeks here at Northview, we've been looking at, in a similar way, how God told the people of Israel to do that exact thing. The 10 Commandments has been our text for this last 10 weeks, 8 weeks up to today. But essentially what He's telling this new nation is that very same thing. I rescued you. You used to be slaves. You used to be in bondage. You used to be in Egypt. I heard your cry. I pulled you out of that world. I've set you now in a new place with new freedom. Now, here's how people who have been transformed by grace Here's how they live. Here's how they live. Let me show you in 10 ways. Here's how they live. We've been unpacking each and every one of these commandments, finding that they're still absolutely relevant in so many ways to life today. And we find ourselves today at number 8. It's a short little commandment in words, but it's big on application. Exodus chapter 20:15 says, "You shall not steal." That's commandment number 8. You shall not steal. But for the most part, this commandment had 2 primary applications. It had to do with stealing people, and it had to do with stealing possessions. Now, stealing people might surprise you, but you've got to get into the context that this was actually first written in, and that was very much a reality in that day. In fact, Israel had been a stolen people. They were a people who were slaves. And so God was telling Israel, don't live like that. You've been called out of that. Don't ever subject somebody else to live that reality. Don't steal people, don't steal possessions. That's where we find most of our modern day connection to it in you and I's life, is possessions. There's actually a lot of laws in the Old Testament about personal property. There was a lot of things connected to that. People were living in very close quarters. You got to remember that the nation of Israel went camping for 40 years. If you've ever tried to keep your possessions straight when you're camping and you don't have like a closet, you don't have a box, you don't have a Rubbermaid tub, you don't have anything that's weatherproof. Stuff that you have and you possess is very, very hard to kind of keep track of. It's hard to guard. It's hard to keep right. And that's where all these laws would come into place. God says it very, very quickly, very plainly, with a boundary statement. Do not steal. Do not steal. It's one tiny little commandment, but it had all kinds of lessons inside of it. For example, it was in part a stewardship lesson. It was about ownership. It was about teaching this reality to us, is that our stuff, what's mine is God's, and what's yours is God's. Like, He owns it all. What's mine is God's, what's yours is God's. This statement helped teach that lesson. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in the world, all who live in it." It's all God's. It's all God's. Everything you and I possess, everything you and I have, we have because God has given it to us. You might argue, well, I've worked pretty hard for that. You have. But with what intellect? And with what giftedness? And with what strength? And with what connections? And with what relationship? I'm not taking away the effort that you've put into it, but everything you've been able to do because God's given you the ability to do it. So part of this commandment was teaching Israel a stewardship lesson about stuff, and that our stuff is simultaneously ours and not ours at the same time. It's ours in a sense because there's a sense in which God has given human beings, in part of their DNA, there's a sense of dignity attached to acquiring and managing stuff. But there's also, on the other side of it, this tension that exists that at the end of it all, for each of us, it all goes back in the box. It's monopoly for all of us. No matter how many boardwalks and park places you have, no matter how many hotels and houses you've accumulated, 100 years from now, nobody is going to know your name. And nobody's going to know how much money you had in your bank account. None of it is going to matter. And so part of life when it comes to stuff is learning to manage the tension between it's God-given as a part of my dignity to be able to accumulate stuff, to manage stuff, but also keep in mind that I can't take any of it with me. It's God's and it's mine simultaneously. Now, we struggle to understand the God part. We get it's my part. Like one of our kids' first words that they ever learn. Mine, 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 right? We try to do dada or mama and they go mine. I never had to teach my kids the word mine. Never, ever even tried to teach them that word. And yet, it was one of the first words they understood. Mine, I want it. It's territorial, it's possessive. And so part of the reason that God would speak a commandment, do not steal, was because He wanted to teach us about stewardship. That what we think is ours is not actually ours. It's God's. And so when you're stealing from someone, you're actually stealing from God, not just the other person. Because what's yours is God's, what's theirs is God's. He's given it to them. And when you steal from somebody else, you're not trusting him to take care of you, and you're robbing someone else of the way God's provided for them. Stealing is a sin because it shows a failure to trust. Now, someone has said, and I love this explanation, that in capitalism, the money is yours to do what you want. In socialism, it belongs to the state, so the state uses it how they want. In Christianity, it's God's, and he uses it. It must be used as God directs. So this commandment was far more than just a boundary trying to tell us don't cross this line. It was in part trying to teach us a lesson about how to steward or manage everything we have. It was also a love lesson. A love lesson. A love lesson. Do not steal. A love lesson. Here's why. What was Jesus, when he was asked, how do you summarize the Ten Commandments? How do you summarize all the law? As if 10 was just too many. Guys, God, this is too much. 10 is too many. Can you reduce it down? Jesus goes, okay, here you go. Here's the summary. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So then the follow-up question was, well, who's my neighbor? And that's where the story of the Good Samaritan came. So the Good Samaritan story is that there's this guy walking down a road and he gets jumped and mugged. Everything he has stolen, he's left for dead on the side of the road by thieves. They leave and run off with his stuff. A priest and a Levite come by. They don't want anything to do with him. They don't help. They walk right past him. Then a Samaritan who had the poor racial relations between the Jews and the Samaritans. It was the Samaritan who looked at the man that was injured, had compassion on him, had pity on him, bandaged his wounds, took him to go get medical help, paid for that medical help, and said, I'm going to be back in a little while. Here's money to cover all the expenses, and if this doesn't cover it, I'll give you whatever's owed when I come back. Jesus said, who was the neighbor in that scenario? Well, that story represents three very different attitudes towards stuff. The thieves said, what's yours is mine if I can take it. If I can pry it from your cold, dead hands, I will. And whatever you thought you possessed, I will make sure I possess by the end of the day. The priest and the Levite had the thought process of, well, what's mine is mine and you can't have it. But it was the Good Samaritan who thought, what's mine is God's and I'll use it as God directs. Here's the love lesson in the whole thing. There's a love lesson in do not steal. Here it is. It's impossible to love your neighbor and steal from him at the same time. You can't. And so by saying do not steal, God was teaching his people to love in a very tangible way. Listen, as a kid, one of my first memories of stealing centered around a Star Wars toy. I'm old enough that I played with the OG original first edition Star Wars toys, okay? Not episode 1, 2, and 3, episode 4, 5, and 6, okay? I mean the OGs, right? So we go to some friend's house. My parents, family, and a couple other families, we all get together. At some point in that night, we end up back in a bedroom of one of the boys whose family's home we were having dinner at, and he's got a bunch of Star Wars toys. Well, I noticed that he had a toy exactly like I had, except his toy, like mine, he had an accessory for that toy that I did not have for my toy. And I mean, I'm not even going to pretend to say anything other than what actually happened. I just flat stole it. I mean, just ganked it, put it in my pocket, and we're driving home. And I was a terrible thief. Terrible. I don't know if it was guilty conscience speaking or if I was trying to cover my tracks. But on the way home, we get to the house and I pull it out of my pocket and I go, look what I found in my pocket. Now, my mom had this photographic memory of every gift that I've ever received in my entire life. Dad probably had no clue. Was that yours or not yours? Mom was like, that is not, I know you stole that. I know you stole that. And so, in no uncertain terms, I was informed when we go to church on Sunday, because they went to church for this. When you go to church on Sunday, you're going to go take that toy back to Billy. And you're going to apologize and you're going to ask for his forgiveness. You're going to give that back to him. Oh my gosh. That was like a death sentence. I mean, it was a death sentence. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 17 says, food gained by fraud tastes sweet, but one ends up with a mouthful of gravel. I lived that. Okay? I could change the verse to say, Star Wars toys gained by fraud seem sweet, seem like a good idea, but in the end, you end up with a mouthful of gravel. What I actually did was I stood in a gravel parking lot after church, face to face, man to man. And I had to say, I stole this from you to another person. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? He was probably 4 or 5 years older than me too, which just made it even worse. When 12 and 7 come together, 12 seems like 200. I had to say, I'm sorry. And you know what he said to me? You know what he said? He said, I forgive you. And then he said, I would have just given it to you if you would have asked. Ugh. It was there that I realized I had broken trust inside of a community that was built on trust. We were a community of believers. We were a community of people who were united in love for God and love for each other. And I broke the trust inside of that community. You can't steal from somebody and love them at the same time. So inside of this commandment was a love lesson. God was teaching us, in the communities of trust that you build, there must be not suspicion or doubt or apprehension or fear, but trust that it's safe. If you've ever had anything stolen from you, you know that it feels like, even if you didn't get physically hurt, you feel emotionally violated. You feel like something was taken from you. People that I've talked to who've had their home broken into in a very full and complete and even like kind of destructive way will talk about how emotionally frustrated and painful that was for them. That there was something safe that was broken and violated, you know? I mean, even if something simple, I remember having sunglasses stolen out of my truck one time. I mean, it was like, of all the things, you took my sunglasses. Like, they were probably worth $50 at most, but they were my sunglasses. They fit my head just right. I've never been able to find a pair like them since. You know, it's like, come on. You took something from me that I'll never get back. And you feel haunted by it. It was a stewardship lesson. What's mine is God's. What's yours is God's. It was a love lesson, that it's impossible to love your neighbor and steal from them at the same time. It was also an integrity lesson. It was teaching us that how you get what you've got matters. That the ends don't justify the means. There's a way to do it the right way, and there's a way to do it the wrong way. The heart of the commandment is that your attitude and your actions with people and money and stuff is a huge part of your relationship with God. In fact, what I would say is that most Christians, what we talked about last week and this week, are two of the areas that they most struggle to integrate faith and daily life together. Sexuality and money. Those are two areas that many followers of Jesus want to try to find a different road other than the one that he's plainly marked out. He's inviting us in this command to remember that integrity matters. How you get what you've got matters. So when you think about stealing, you almost have to do a little bit of work in your mind to be more specific about what it is. Because if you're not careful, where we go with this commandment is like Ocean's 11. It's like it's the casino heist, or it's like breaking into the bank, and you're like, don't do that. Don't do that. But it's actually so much more every day than we would probably realize. For Israel, it was very tangible, because everything was tangible. Everything in life was tangible. Anything that was stolen was tangible. But today, a lot of things that could be stolen aren't tangible. I mean, I just started scratching out a list of all the different ways this commandment might be able to be broken. Here's what I came up with: property theft, tax evasion, overcharging, plagiarism, laziness at work, fraud, copyright infringement, digital piracy, identity theft, loan defaulting. And what about things like stealing honor or stolen valor in a military sense, reputation? There's so many different ways that this could connect or this could apply. I remember when I was in college, the big conversation had to do with the dawn of the digital age. So I went to college when Napster hit the airwaves, and you could download stuff, and there was all kinds of piracy going on. I mean, picture this. I'm at Bible College Seminary, and the halls of Bible College Seminary are full of 21, 22-year-old guys downloading, pirating music and burning CDs and going, hey, I got the latest Dave Matthews, I got the latest and here, do you want a copy? Do you want a copy? Do you want a copy? What was that if not stealing? And you got one guy that would stand up and go like, no, I'm not doing that. He'd be like, oh, don't talk about that. Don't bring that up. Hush, we're not listening to you. Don't say it. It's different. It's different, right? I remember the debates. It's not different. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2 says, treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. Sometimes we'll make decisions because we'll say, or do things because we'll say, look, nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to know. But even if nobody else knows, you need to know that God knows. Even if nobody else knows, God knows. And you know. And so you have to, this is maybe a technique or a tip that you might be able to use. This has been very, very helpful for me whenever I found myself in a day-to-day situation where, whether it's too much change was given back, or something was given that I wasn't supposed to receive, or a discount, or whatever it may be. I've learned to monetize the decision and say in a sentence, whatever that monetary amount is, like this: is my integrity worth $20? Rather than just say, it's just $20. To say it in a sentence: is my integrity worth $20? Or if it's $100, is my integrity worth $100? Is my integrity worth $1,000? You can keep asking yourself the question, say it in a sentence, and you'll start to realize, no, it's worth more than that to me. Whatever the number is, when I say it out loud, it starts to take on a different meaning in my life. I've visualized the price of the decision. Now, this is one of those conversations that, like a lot of the ones we've had so far, start out like, I'm not so bad. Oh gosh, okay, convicted. So the conversation then becomes, how do we make it right? Like, how do you make this right? I think one of my places I would go is one of the minor stories in the New Testament that kind of has become a major story, thanks in part to a children's song that is unforgettable, that none of us can get out of our head. It's the story of a guy named Zacchaeus, right? And I can't tell the story of Zacchaeus or even say the name Zacchaeus without being reminded he's a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. And he climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see, right? You went there too in your head, right? I see hand motions happening. I love it. Yeah. But the story is so much more raw than the song ever makes it out. Because this dude is a thief. He is a professional scoundrel. That's what he is. He is an absolute, just dirty dog of a guy. And he makes his money by extorting, stealing, and just abusing people day after day after day. You know, the song never includes this, and even the scriptures never include it, but I wonder if a guy like Zacchaeus, living the life that he had lived, ever laid at night looking up at the ceiling, just riddled with guilt. Like he just knew, even if I've made a bunch of money, it's not worth it. Or maybe he wondered if he could ever break out of this trap. Like, could he ever kind of come clean or stop doing what he was doing and be able to be given by society another chance? I don't know if he thought those thoughts. I know that sometimes living in darkness has a way of numbing us to some of those thoughts and realities, but there's also sometimes moments where we come to a crashing halt. And the road that we've been on, that road to destruction, hits a spot where there's enough pain where we just wonder, like, why am I doing it like this? For whatever reason, when he heard that Jesus was coming to town, he determined that he wanted to try to find audience with him. He kept his distance. He did climb up in that tree, probably so he could be a little more, at a distance listening to Jesus. Maybe he had heard the story of Jesus' interaction with other people like him. I mean, after all, he had called another tax collector to be in his inner circle, Levi, or Matthew, as we might know him as now. That was his background. As Jesus comes by, though, what we know of the story is that he invites himself over to Zacchaeus' house. And again, we don't have the story of what exactly was said, but at the end of it, we have this declaration from Zacchaeus. Lord, half my possessions I'll give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll give back 4 times as much. I mean, that's a man whose attitude towards money and stuff has been changed. It's a man who's been transformed by the grace that was offered to him in Christ. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28 says, if you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good hard work, and then give generously to others in need. That's what Zacchaeus did. He encountered the grace of Jesus. And the grace of Jesus compelled him to move out of a dishonorable way of making money and to be generous with what God had given him. Find grace, work hard, be generous. It's a foolproof strategy to taking this commandment and staying away from it and its boundary as far away as you possibly can. Receive grace, work hard, accumulate over time in an honest way, and be generous with what God brings your way, so that his good work and his good reputation and people who are in need can be helped. Receive grace. That's step 1. That's always the foundation for you and I. Zacchaeus was not transformed because he decided to work hard and be generous. He was generous and decided to work hard and honest because he found grace. He found that in his brokenness and his blatant violation of this command and probably many others, that what God had for him was not scorn, but an invitation to follow him and to have those sins forgiven. Do you think it's an accident that Jesus' last words on the cross, as he was breathing his final breaths, his last words were, "It is finished"? Translation was paid in full. But what I'm telling you is that your salvation was not stolen. It was paid for. It was paid for completely and totally. Nobody got ripped off. Nobody got a raw deal. Nobody cut any corners. You were paid for in full, in total, completely. Not of anything that you deserved, but God, out of his great mercy and his great love for you, he pursued you And he found you in that place of brokenness, and he offered you a gift that you could have never found or received on your own. That's what transforms Zacchaeus. That's what's been transforming students' lives over the last couple weeks. And that's what can transform your life. Not your decision to do everything right from here forward, but your decision to accept the grace and love and mercy and goodness and kindness of a God who will not leave you alone, who pursues you, who seeks you, who loves you and lavishes on you, and invites you in response to that love, live for me, live to honor me. So we come to this time of decision. I invite you to make that same decision that Zacchaeus came to. Whether stealing is your issue, or just in general, we're talking about the issue of sin that has separated you from God. That you see this is a moment to say, it's time to change. It's time to be done with that. It's time to leave an old life behind and a new life can be out in front. This is a moment for you to step into that. As we sing, as we worship, if you'd like to respond via the code on the screen, or if you'd like to talk with someone in person, I'll be standing at the back. You can come to the Connect kiosk after service. We'd love to help you take one more step closer to Jesus. Stop by there. Let us pray with you. Let us talk with you. But let's take this moment that we have right here. Let's turn our direction, turn our attention towards the one who has lavished us with so many gifts, and commit to live for him and him alone. Will you stand with me and will you pray?